The F-22 Raptor shuddered violently as Category 5 hurricane Delilah's winds slammed into its titanium frame at 180 miles per hour. Through the cockpit's rain-streaked canopy, Captain Maya Rodriguez could barely make out the oil rig below, its emergency beacon flashing desperately through the storm's fury. 23 souls trapped on a platform that was already listing dangerously in 30-foot swells, with the hurricane's eye wall bearing down on them like nature's own weapon of mass destruction. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Maya's hands were steady on the controls, but her heart was racing not from fear of the storm, but from the weight of what she was about to attempt. No pilot in aviation history had ever successfully landed a stealth fighter in hurricane conditions. The physics alone should have made it impossible. Yet here she was, defying everything the old boys club at Nellis Air Force Base had told her about what women couldn't do, about what was beyond her capabilities, about how she'd never measure up to the legacy of her father. 18 hours earlier, Maya had been sitting in the cramped office of Colonel James Hartford, listening to the kind of conversation that had defined her entire military career. The walls were covered with photographs of Hartford's glory days as a test pilot, back when women weren't allowed in combat roles and the fighter-pilot community was an exclusive brotherhood that guarded its traditions with religious fervor. "Rodriguez, you're a competent pilot," Hartford had said, not bothering to look up from the paperwork scattered across his desk. "But this rescue mission requires someone with experience in extreme weather conditions. Someone who can handle the pressure of flying a $100 million aircraft in impossible circumstances." Maya had felt the familiar burn of frustration rising in her chest. She'd graduated top of her class from the Air Force Academy. She'd logged more flight hours than half the men in her squadron. She'd proven herself in combat operations over 3 different theaters. Yet somehow she was always the one who wasn't quite ready for the next level of responsibility. "Sir, with respect, I've flown combat missions in sandstorms over Afghanistan and thunderstorms over Eastern Europe," she'd replied, keeping her voice carefully neutral. "My flight record speaks for itself." Hartford had finally looked up, his gray eyes carrying the weight of 30 years in the cockpit and the unshakable belief that some things never changed. "Your flight record shows you're a capable pilot, Captain. But this isn't about capability. This is about judgment. About understanding when a mission is beyond your limitations." The mission briefing had been straightforward in its impossibility. Hurricane Delilah, the strongest storm on record in the Gulf of Mexico, had caught the offshore drilling platform Neptune's Pride in its path. The platform's helicopter had been destroyed in the initial wave surge, and the crew's evacuation boats had been swamped by 40-foot swells. With the storm intensifying and moving faster than predicted, traditional rescue operations were out of the question. The only aircraft capable of reaching the platform through the hurricane's outer bands was an F-22 Raptor, modified with extended fuel tanks and equipped with experimental weather-penetrating radar. It was a one-way suicide mission disguised as a rescue operation, requiring a pilot to fly through conditions that would tear most aircraft apart, then somehow extract 23 people from a platform that was already half underwater. "Lieutenant Colonel Patterson will be taking the mission," Hartford had announced. "He has the experience and the temperament for this kind of operation." Maya had known Patterson for 3 years. He was a solid pilot with good instincts and unshakable confidence, but he'd never flown in weather conditions worse than a moderate thunderstorm. More importantly, he'd been one of the loudest voices questioning whether women belonged in fighter cockpits, arguing that they lacked the physical and mental toughness required for combat aviation. "Sir, Patterson hasn't flown weather penetration missions," Maya had pointed out. "I spent 2 years with the hurricane hunters before transferring to fighters. I've flown directly through the eye walls of Category 4 storms." In a C-130 Hercules, Hartford had replied dismissively, "Flying a cargo plane through a hurricane is completely different from piloting a fighter aircraft. The stress factors, the G-forces, the precision required, it's not the same thing at all." Maya had wanted to argue, to point out that the principles of severe weather flying were universal regardless of aircraft type, but she'd learned over the years when to pick her battles. Instead, she'd simply nodded and left Hartford's office, carrying the familiar weight of another opportunity denied. Another chance to prove herself given to someone else simply because he was a man. She'd spent the rest of that afternoon in the squadron ready room, studying weather reports and satellite imagery of Hurricane Delilah. The storm was a monster, with sustained winds of 175 miles per hour and gusts exceeding 200. Its eye wall was 40 miles across, creating a corridor of relative calm surrounded by the most violent atmospheric conditions on Earth. Traditional meteorology suggested that any aircraft entering those conditions would be torn apart by wind shear and turbulence. But Maya had seen storms like this before. During her time with the 53rd Weather Reconnaissance Squadron, she'd flown through the hearts of hurricanes that meteorologists claimed were impossible to penetrate. She'd learned to read the subtle signs that indicated safe passages through the chaos, to use the storm's own energy patterns to navigate through its most dangerous sections. More importantly, she understood something that Hartford and Patterson didn't grasp about the physics of the rescue mission. The F-22 stealth characteristics weren't just about avoiding enemy radar. They also made the aircraft uniquely suited for extreme weather penetration. Its angular surfaces and advanced composites were designed to deflect electromagnetic energy, which meant they would also deflect and channel wind flow in ways that could actually help stabilize the aircraft in severe turbulence. That evening, Maya had called her father, retired Air Force General Carlos Rodriguez, the first Hispanic pilot to command a fighter wing and one of the few people who truly understood the challenges she faced in a military culture that was still adapting to women in combat roles. "They're giving the hurricane mission to Patterson," she'd told him over the encrypted line. Her father had been quiet for a long moment. Carlos Rodriguez had broken barriers of his own during his career, fighting against prejudice and stereotypes that questioned whether Hispanic pilots could compete at the highest levels of military aviation. He understood the frustration of being passed over for opportunities simply because you didn't fit the traditional mold. "What does your gut tell you about the mission?" he'd finally asked. "That Patterson's going to get himself killed," Maya had replied without hesitation. "He doesn't understand severe weather flying. He'll try to muscle his way through conditions that require finesse and adaptability. And you think you can handle it?" Maya had looked out the window of her base housing, watching storm clouds building on the horizon as Hurricane Delilah approached the mainland. "I know I can handle it. The question is whether I'll get the chance." Her father had sighed, the sound carrying 30 years of his own battles against institutional prejudice. "Maya, sometimes the system doesn't give us the chances we deserve. But sometimes we have to create our own opportunities." That conversation had stayed with her through the night as she'd studied mission parameters and weather data, running through scenarios in her mind and calculating approaches that might make the impossible rescue achievable. By dawn, she'd developed a flight plan that could work, a precise sequence of maneuvers that would use Hurricane Delilah's own wind patterns to reach the oil platform and extract its crew. The irony wasn't lost on her that the same storm everyone else saw as an insurmountable obstacle might actually be the key to her success. Hurricanes were chaotic systems, but they followed predictable patterns for pilots who understood their structure. The eye wall that everyone feared could become a corridor of opportunity for someone with the skill and experience to navigate its complexities. As Maya had suited up that morning for what she assumed would be another routine training flight, she'd made a decision that would either end her military career or prove once and for all that she belonged among the elite ranks of military aviation. She was going to show Hartford, Patterson, and everyone else who'd ever doubted her capabilities exactly what a woman could accomplish when the stakes were life and death. The morning briefing had proceeded as expected. Patterson had accepted the mission with the kind of confident swagger that Maya had seen destroy more than one pilot who confused bravado with competence. Hartford had outlined the tactical challenges and emphasized the importance of following protocols, despite the fact that no protocols existed for flying fighters through Category 5 hurricanes. Weather window opens at 1400 hours, Hartford had announced. Neptune's pride has maybe 6 hours before the platform structure fails completely. After that, it won't matter how good a pilot we send. Maya had sat in the back of the briefing room, watching Patterson nod at appropriate moments and ask questions that revealed his fundamental misunderstanding of the challenges he was about to face. He was thinking about the mission in terms of standard combat flying, as if Hurricane Delilah was just another enemy to be defeated through superior firepower and aggressive tactics. But storms weren't enemies to be conquered. They were natural forces to be respected, understood, and navigated with precision and humility. The pilots who survived severe weather flying were those who learned to work with the storm's energy rather than fighting against it. As the briefing concluded and Patterson headed toward the flight line, Maya made her choice. She slipped away from the group and headed toward Hangar 7, where the modified F-22 sat, waiting for a mission that would require every skill she developed over 8 years of military flying. The hangar was quiet in the pre-storm calm, with most of the base personnel securing equipment and preparing for Hurricane Delilah's arrival. Maya performed her pre-flight inspection with the methodical precision that had been drilled into her at the academy, checking every system and control surface with the knowledge that mechanical failure in hurricane conditions meant certain death. The F-22 was beautiful in its lethality, all sharp angles and advanced composites designed to slip through enemy airspace undetected. Its twin engines could push the aircraft to speeds exceeding Mach 2, and its avionics suite represented the pinnacle of American aerospace technology. In the right hands, it was the most capable fighter aircraft ever built. Maya was betting her life that her hands were the right ones. As she strapped herself into the ejection seat and began the engine startup sequence, she thought about all the voices that had told her she wasn't strong enough, smart enough, or tough enough to succeed in military aviation. Her high school guidance counselor who'd suggested she consider nursing instead of engineering. The academy instructors who'd pushed her harder than her male classmates, looking for any sign of weakness. The squadron mates who'd questioned whether she had the killer instinct required for combat flying. Today, she was going to answer all of them at once. The F-22's engines spooled up with their characteristic high-pitched whine as Maya completed the startup checklist with practiced efficiency. Through the hangar's open doors, she could see the sky darkening as Hurricane Delilah's outer bands approached. Tyndall Air Force Base. The base weather station was reporting sustained winds of 60 miles per hour with gusts approaching 90. Conditions that would normally ground all aircraft operations. Maya keyed her radio to ground control frequency. Tyndall ground. Raptor 77 requesting taxi clearance for immediate departure. The response came back with audible confusion. Raptor 77, this is ground control. We show no scheduled departures for your aircraft. Please state your mission authorization. Maya's finger hesitated over the transmit button for only a moment. Once she responded, there would be no turning back from the most career-ending decision of her life. But somewhere in the Gulf of Mexico, 23 people were running out of time while Patterson sat in the ready room, studying weather reports and second-guessing himself into paralysis. Ground control, Raptor 77 departing under emergency authority for humanitarian rescue operations. Transmitting flight plan now. She punched her pre-programmed route into the aircraft's navigation system, a carefully calculated path that would take her through Hurricane Delilah's northeastern quadrant, using the storm's rotation to slingshot toward Neptune's pride. The route violated every standard operating procedure for severe weather flying. But Maya had learned during her Hurricane Hunter days that sometimes the most dangerous path was actually the safest one. Raptor 77, negative on departure clearance. Ground control responded, the controller's voice tight with concern. Current weather conditions exceed operational limits for all aircraft. Return to parking position immediately. Maya was already taxiing toward the runway, her aircraft's low-profile silhouette cutting through the strengthening winds like a predatory shark. The F-22's advanced flight control systems were automatically adjusting control surface positions to compensate for the gusting cross-winds, but she could feel the aircraft fighting to maintain stability, even at taxi speed. Ground control, I have an emergency situation requiring immediate departure, she transmitted back. 23 souls in distress, no other rescue assets available. Taking the active runway now. The radio exploded with chatter as multiple voices tried to coordinate her recall. She recognized Colonel Hartford's distinctive bark cutting through the chaos, followed by the base commander's measured tones as higher authority took control of the situation. Within minutes, every senior officer at Tyndall would know that Captain Maya Rodriguez had stolen a $100 million stealth fighter to conduct an unauthorized rescue mission. Maya reached the runway threshold and performed her final engine checks, watching her instruments climb to takeoff power settings. Through her heads-up display, she could see the first bands of serious weather approaching from the southeast, towering thunderheads that rose above 50,000 feet like atmospheric mountains. Raptor 77, this is Colonel Hartford. Her squadron commander's voice crackled through her headset. You are ordered to abort takeoff immediately and return to the hangar. What you're contemplating is suicide, Rodriguez. No pilot has ever successfully flown a fighter through Category 5 conditions. Maya lined up on the runway center line, feeling the F-22's twin engines pushing against her back, with 35,000 pounds of combined thrust. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Colonel, respectfully, no pilot has ever tried. Those people on Neptune's Pride don't have the luxury of waiting for perfect conditions. She released the brakes and felt the aircraft leap forward with predatory acceleration. The F-22 consumed runway at an alarming rate, its advanced engines transforming jet fuel into pure kinetic energy that pressed her deep into her ejection seat. At 140 knots, she pulled back on the stick and felt the landing gear leave solid ground. Trading the relative safety of Earth for the chaos of Hurricane Delilah's outer circulation. Climbing through 3,000 feet, Maya encountered the first serious turbulence as her aircraft punched through a band of convective cells. The F-22 bucked and rolled like an angry bronco, its flight control computers working frantically to maintain stable flight as wind shear threatened to flip the aircraft inverted. Warning lights illuminated across her instrument panel as the autopilot disengaged, leaving her to hand-fly the fighter through conditions that would challenge even the most experienced pilots. Raptor 77, we're tracking you on radar. Hartford's voice had taken on a tone of grudging respect mixed with genuine concern. Maya, you're flying into meteorological conditions that no aircraft is designed to handle. Your father would never forgive me if I let you kill yourself proving a point. The mention of her father struck deeper than Maya expected. General Rodriguez had spent his entire career fighting the same battle she was facing now, proving that Hispanic pilots could compete at the highest levels of military aviation. He'd never had to steal aircraft to get his chances, but he'd also never faced the systematic exclusion that women in combat aviation still encountered. Colonel, with respect, this isn't about proving a point, Maya replied, wrestling her controls as another wave of severe turbulence tried to tear the wings off her aircraft. This is about 23 people who are going to die if someone doesn't reach them in the next 4 hours. She was now 30 miles from the coast, flying through the kind of weather that meteorologists labeled as unsurvivable. Hurricane Delilah's wind speeds had increased to 180 miles per hour, with embedded tornadoes that could destroy aircraft instantaneously. The storm's eye was still 2 hours away from Neptune's Pride, but its outer bands were already generating conditions that challenged the F-22 structural limits. Maya's weather radar painted a picture of atmospheric violence that defied comprehension. Towering supercells stretched from sea level to the edge of the stratosphere, their cores glowing red and purple with the electromagnetic signatures of extreme turbulence. Between these cells, she could see narrow corridors of slightly less violent air, pathways that might allow her to penetrate deeper into the storm system. "Maya, this is General Morrison from 9th Air Force Headquarters." A new voice cut through the radio chatter with unmistakable authority. "We're scrambling interceptors to escort you back to base. Do not make this situation worse than it already is." Maya checked her navigation display. She was still 40 minutes from Neptune's Pride, flying through the most dangerous airspace in the Western Hemisphere, while the entire Air Force mobilized to stop her. The interceptors Morrison mentioned would be F-15 Eagles from Eglin Air Force Base, aircraft with enough speed and firepower to force her down if their pilots were willing to engage in combat over the Gulf of Mexico. "General Morrison, respectfully, by the time your interceptors reach my position, I'll already be at the target," Maya transmitted back. "And sir, those F-15s aren't designed for severe weather penetration. You'll be sending more pilots into danger for no tactical advantage." She banked hard left to avoid a supercell that towered above 40,000 feet, its rotation visible on her radar scope like a massive atmospheric drill bit. The F-22 shuddered through turbulence that would have destroyed lesser aircraft, its advanced composites and titanium frame flexing under stresses that pushed the airframe to its absolute limits. Through breaks in the cloud cover, Maya caught glimpses of the Gulf of Mexico below. Its normally blue waters turned gray and white by wind-driven spray and 40-foot swells. She could see the distinctive signature of Neptune's Pride on her radar, a small metallic blip that represented 23 lives hanging in the balance between life and death. Her secure satellite phone buzzed with an incoming call. Maya fumbled for the device with one hand while maintaining control with the other, nearly sending the fighter into an unrecoverable spin before she managed to stabilize. "Maya, this is Dr. Sarah Chun from the National Hurricane Center." The voice was tight with professional concern. "We've been monitoring your flight path through our tracking systems. What you're attempting is meteorologically impossible. The wind shear alone should have destroyed your aircraft by now." Maya rolled inverted to dive under another supercell, using the F-22's incredible agility to thread between weather systems that would swallow commercial aircraft whole. "Dr. Chun, I flew with the Hurricane Hunters for 2 years before transferring to fighters. I understand severe weather dynamics better than most meteorologists." "Not like this," Chun replied urgently. "Maya, Delilah is generating wind speeds that exceed anything we've ever recorded. You're flying through conditions that don't exist in any training manual or simulation program. The atmospheric physics alone should make controlled flight impossible." Maya could see Neptune's Pride now, a stubby industrial platform that looked impossibly small against the storm-tossed waters of the Gulf. The structure was already listing 15 degrees. To port, its support columns buckled by wave action that had turned the drilling platform into a twisted maze of metal and machinery. "Dr. Chen, impossible is a relative term when 23 lives are at stake," Maya responded, beginning her descent toward the platform while fighting crosswinds that tried to slam her aircraft into the ocean. "Besides, someone forgot to tell my airplane that this is supposed to be impossible." The truth was that the F-22 was performing beyond its design specifications. its stealth characteristics and advanced aerodynamics creating unexpected advantages in extreme weather conditions. The same angular surfaces that deflected radar energy were also channeling wind flow in ways that actually stabilized the aircraft in severe turbulence. Maya was discovering that her aircraft's stealth technology made it uniquely suited for hurricane penetration, a capability that no one had ever thought to test. Her radar warning receiver began chirping insistently, indicating that multiple aircraft were approaching her position from the northeast. The F-15 interceptors were closing fast, their pilots undoubtedly struggling with the same weather conditions that Maya was navigating with increasing confidence. Raptor 77, this is Eagle Flight Leader, a new voice cut through the static. You are ordered to turn to heading 090 and proceed to Eglin Air Force Base for immediate landing. Failure to comply will result in defensive action. Maya recognized the voice as Major Tom Bradley, a pilot she'd trained with during her early fighter days and one of the few men in the squadron who'd treated her as an equal rather than an unwelcome intruder. If anyone understood the impossible position she was in, it would be Bradley. Eagle Leader, this is Maya, she transmitted back, dropping the formal call signs for a moment of human connection. Tom, I wouldn't be out here if there was any other option. Those people on Neptune's Pride have maybe 2 hours before the platform breaks apart completely. Maya commanded, watching through her sensors as the bright orange life rafts inflated and dropped into the mountainous seas below. Neptune's Pride. The platform crew moved with professional efficiency, rappelling down emergency lines to reach the life rafts before the next wave surge could sweep them away. Maya maintained her windbreak position until all 23 survivors were aboard the life rafts. Then began a complex aerial shepherding operation that had never been attempted in aviation history. She used her aircraft's wake turbulence and engine wash to push the life rafts away from Neptune's Pride, guiding them toward coordinates where Coast Guard vessels were waiting beyond the storm's most violent conditions. Eagle Leader, this is Maya, she transmitted to Major Bradley's interceptor flight. I need you to contact Coast Guard Group Mobile and give them these exact coordinates for survivor pickup. Current drift rate is 2 nautical miles per hour on bearing 185. Bradley's response carried a tone of professional admiration mixed with disbelief. Maya, I'm watching this on satellite downlink from 9th Air Force. What you just accomplished is going to rewrite every manual on combat search and rescue. Maya was already climbing away from the ocean surface, her fuel gauges showing levels that would normally trigger emergency landing procedures. The flight back to Tyndall would require precise fuel management and perfect navigation, with no margin for error or extended maneuvering. She'd pushed her aircraft and herself to the absolute limits of human and mechanical capability. All aircraft. This is General Morrison. The 9th Air Force commander's voice cut through the radio chatter with unmistakable authority. Operation Hurricane Rescue is hereby designated a successful military operation under emergency humanitarian protocols. Captain Rodriguez is cleared for immediate return to base with full honors. The flight back to Tyndall Air Force Base took 43 minutes through weather conditions that were still officially unsurvivable. Maya navigated by instrument alone, flying through cloud formations that extended from sea level to 50,000 feet while managing fuel consumption that left her with exactly 7 minutes of flying time when she touched down on Tyndall's storm-battered runway. Colonel Hartford was waiting in the operations center when Maya completed her post-flight debriefing, his expression unreadable as she detailed the mission parameters and rescue procedures she'd employed. The same man who had dismissed her capabilities 18 hours earlier now sat in silence as she described aviation techniques that would be studied at test pilot schools for decades to come. Rodriguez, Hartford finally said, his voice carrying a tone she'd never heard from him before. What you accomplished today will be remembered as one of the finest examples of military aviation in Air Force history. Those 23 people owe their lives to your skill and determination." Maya removed her helmet, her hair matted with sweat and her hands still trembling from the adrenaline that had sustained her through 6 hours of impossible flying. "Sir, I just did what needed to be done. Someone had to try." "No," Hartford replied, standing to face her with the kind of respect that had been absent from their previous conversations. "What you did was prove that leadership and courage aren't determined by gender or tradition. They're determined by character and competence." 3 weeks later, Maya stood in the Pentagon's Hall of Heroes as the Secretary of the Air Force pinned the Distinguished Flying Cross to her uniform, the nation's highest award for aerial achievement. The citation read in part, "Captain Rodriguez's extraordinary heroism and exceptional flying skills in the face of impossible conditions resulted in the successful rescue of 23 civilians and advanced the science of severe weather aviation by decades." Her father, General Carlos Rodriguez, stood in the front row of the ceremony, his face reflecting the pride of a man who had spent his career breaking barriers and watching his daughter shatter them completely. Next to him sat the crew of Neptune's Pride, 23 people whose lives had been saved by a pilot who refused to accept that some things were impossible. Colonel Hartford approached Maya after the ceremony, his expression still carrying the wonder of someone who had witnessed history being made. "Rodriguez, I have new orders for you. The Air Force is establishing a new unit focused on extreme weather rescue operations. They want you to command it." Maya looked out through the Pentagon's windows at the clear Washington sky, thinking about storms yet to come and lives yet to be saved by pilots who understood that impossible was just another word for something that hadn't been accomplished yet. "Sir, I accept," she replied, "but I have one condition. The unit will be open to any pilot with the skill and determination to succeed, regardless of gender, background, or what anyone else thinks they can or cannot accomplish." Hartford smiled for the first time since she'd known him. "Rodriguez, I wouldn't have it any other way." 6 months later, Captain Maya Rodriguez, newly promoted to Major, stood before the first class of the Air Force Extreme Weather Rescue School, looking at a group of pilots that included equal numbers of men and women from every demographic the military had to offer. "The first thing you need to understand about extreme weather flying," she began, "is that the storm doesn't care what anyone else thinks you can or cannot do. It only cares about your skill, your preparation, and your refusal to give up when lives are on the line." Outside the classroom windows, hurricane season was approaching again, bringing with it the promise of impossible conditions and opportunities for ordinary pilots to accomplish extraordinary things. The earthquake struck at 0347 hours Pacific time, a magnitude 9.2 monster that originated 60 miles off the coast of Northern California and sent seismic waves rippling across the Pacific Basin like ripples in a cosmic pond. Major Maya Rodriguez felt the tremor in her quarters at Edwards Air Force Base, the subtle rolling motion that woke her from sleep with the instant alertness that came from years of emergency response training. Her secure phone was already buzzing with incoming calls as she swung her feet to the floor, the distinctive tone that meant someone, somewhere, needed rescuing under impossible conditions. Maya had been running the Air Force Extreme Weather Rescue School for 8 months now, training pilots to operate in conditions that traditional aviation doctrine claimed were unsurvivable. "Major Rodriguez, this is PACOM Emergency Operations." The voice on the phone belonged to Admiral Janet Walsh, Pacific Command's Deputy Operations Officer. "We have a developing situation that requires your immediate expertise. The earthquake triggered a massive tsunami that's combined with a Pacific storm system. We have multiple cruise ships and cargo vessels in distress, plus offshore installations that are completely cut off." Maya was already pulling on her flight suit, her mind shifting into mission planning mode as she processed the tactical situation. Earthquakes were bad enough, but when combined with severe weather and ocean conditions, they created rescue scenarios that pushed beyond the limits of conventional search and rescue operations. Admiral, what's the current weather situation in the affected area? Maya asked, stepping into her boots and grabbing her emergency gear bag. Category 3 Pacific storm with sustained winds of 120 miles per hour, 40-foot seas, and visibility near zero due to earthquake debris in the atmosphere. Walsh replied grimly, "We have the cruise ship Pacific Dawn, with 3,400 passengers and crew taking on water. APPROX, IMATEL, 180 miles west of San Francisco. The vessel lost power when the tsunami hit, and they're reporting structural damage from earthquake-generated waves." Maya felt her pulse quicken as she ran through the logistics in her head. A cruise ship with over 3,000 souls aboard, disabled in conditions that would challenge even the most advanced rescue aircraft. This was exactly the type of scenario her school had been preparing for, the intersection of natural disasters. That created impossible rescue conditions. "What other assets do we have available?" Maya asked, walking rapidly toward the hangar where her modified F-22 sat ready for immediate deployment. "That's the problem," Admiral Walsh continued. "Coast Guard helicopters can't operate in these wind conditions, and our standard rescue aircraft don't have the capability to reach vessels that far offshore in Category 3 storm conditions. And your specialized unit are the only assets with both the range and weather penetration capability to reach the affected areas." Maya reached Hangar 12, where her team of extreme weather rescue specialists was already assembling there. Aircraft and equipment. The Extreme Weather Rescue Squadron consisted of 12 pilots, 8 aircraft, and support equipment that had been specifically designed for operations in impossible conditions. Every pilot in the unit had graduated from Maya's training program, and every one of them had proven their capability to operate beyond the normal limits of military aviation. Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Kim, Maya's deputy commander and the first female pilot to graduate from the program, approached with a tablet displaying real-time weather and rescue data. Kim had been a test pilot before volunteering for extreme weather. Training and her analytical mind made her perfect for coordinating complex rescue operations. "Major, we're tracking 17 vessels in distress across a 400-square-mile area," Kim reported efficiently. "The Pacific Dawn is the largest, but we also have 2 cargo ships, a research vessel, and multiple smaller craft that were caught in the tsunami's path. Total personnel requiring evacuation approaches 5,000 people." Maya studied the tactical display showing vessel positions, weather patterns, and available rescue assets. The mathematics were staggering, even with her entire squadron operating. At maximum efficiency, evacuating 5,000 people from storm-tossed vessels would require multiple sorties under conditions that push their aircraft and crews to absolute limits. "Sarah, I need you to coordinate with Coast Guard Group San Francisco and establish recovery points for survivors we extract," Maya commanded. "Position rescue vessels at the edge of the storm system, far enough out to avoid the worst conditions but close enough to receive survivors quickly." Lieutenant Ana Vesquez, a former Hurricane Hunter pilot who had become one of Maya's most skilled instructors, approached with weather analysis data that painted a picture of atmospheric violence that exceeded even Hurricane Delilah's fury. "Major, the storm system is intensifying as it interacts with the earthquake's atmospheric effects," Vasquez reported. "We're seeing wind speeds approaching 150 miles per hour with embedded supercells that are generating tornadoes over the ocean. Additionally, the earthquake has created atmospheric debris that's reducing visibility to less than a quarter mile." Maya nodded, recognizing the complexity of the rescue environment they were about to enter. This wasn't just severe weather flying. It was operating in conditions that combined multiple natural disasters into a scenario that challenged every aspect of their training and equipment. Aina, I need you to lead the second flight and coordinate rescue operations for the smaller vessels, Maya decided. Take Lieutenants Morgan, Chun, and Patel. Your targets are the research vessel and the 2 cargo ships. I'll take the first flight and handle the Pacific Dawn evacuation. Captain James Morrison, a former Navy pilot who had joined the program after witnessing Maya's hurricane rescue, stepped forward with pre-flight data for the modified rescue aircraft. Morrison had initially been skeptical of women in combat aviation, but Maya's leadership and competence had transformed him into one of her most dedicated squadron members. Major, all aircraft are configured for extended-range rescue operations, Morrison reported. We've loaded maximum fuel, emergency supplies, and survivor extraction equipment. Flight time to target area is approximately 90 minutes through the storm system. Maya walked toward her aircraft, the same F-22 that had carried her through Hurricane Delilah 8 months earlier, now modified with additional rescue equipment and extended-range fuel systems. The stealth fighter had become the prototype for a new generation of rescue aircraft, planes that could operate in conditions that grounded conventional search and rescue assets. As she completed her pre-flight inspection, Maya reflected on how much had changed since that desperate flight to Neptune's Pride. The Air Force had not only vindicated her actions, but had built an entire rescue doctrine around the techniques she'd developed. Her squadron was proof that breaking barriers didn't just change individual lives. It transformed entire institutions. Lieutenant Rebecca Torres, the youngest pilot in the squadron and a recent graduate of Maya's training program, approached with final weather updates and tactical coordination data. Torres had grown up reading about Maya's hurricane rescue and had specifically requested assignment to the Extreme Weather Unit to serve under the woman who had revolutionized military aviation. Major, Pacific Command is coordinating with international rescue assets, but we're the primary response for the next 6 hours, Torres reported. After that, weather conditions are expected to deteriorate further as the storm system continues to intensify. Maya strapped herself into her ejection seat and began the familiar startup sequence that had become second nature over hundreds of hours of extreme weather flying. Around her, 11 other aircraft were preparing for a rescue operation that would test every skill and technique her program had developed. Extreme Weather Squadron, this is Rescue 1. Maya transmitted to her formation as they taxied toward the runway. Mission parameters are multiple vessel rescue under Category 3 storm conditions with earthquake-generated atmospheric disturbance. Primary target is the cruise ship Pacific Dawn with 3,400 souls aboard. Secondary targets are multiple vessels with approximately 1,600 additional personnel requiring evacuation. The response from her pilots carried the confidence of professionals who had trained for exactly this type of scenario. These were men and women who had proven themselves capable of operating beyond traditional limitations, pilots who understood that impossible conditions simply required extraordinary techniques. Rescue Squadron, weather at target area is 150-mile-per-hour sustained winds, 40-foot seas, and near-zero visibility. Maya continued as her formation lined up for takeoff. Recovery assets are positioned at coordinates we'll transmit en route. Remember your training, trust your aircraft, and let's bring these people home. Maya advanced her throttles to takeoff power and felt the familiar surge of acceleration as her modified F-22 consumed runway and transformed jet fuel into kinetic energy. Behind her, 11 other aircraft followed in precise formation, a squadron of pilots who represented the future of military aviation and the proof that excellence knew no boundaries of gender, background, or conventional thinking. As they climbed through the storm-darkened sky toward the Pacific disaster area, Maya keyed her radio one final time. Extreme Weather Squadron, this is Rescue 1. Today we prove that when disaster strikes, the United States Air Force responds with the best pilots, the most advanced aircraft, and the absolute determination to save every life possible, no matter what the conditions, no matter what anyone says is impossible. We bring our people home. The Pacific Ocean stretched ahead of them, its surface churned into chaos by the combined forces of earthquake, tsunami, and storm. Somewhere in that maelstrom, 5,000 people were counting on 12 pilots who had learned that the word impossible was just another challenge to overcome. The Pacific Dawn appeared through the storm like a ghost ship from maritime nightmares, her massive hull listing 30 degrees to starboard as mountainous waves crashed over her superstructure. Maya circled the disabled cruise ship at 2,000 feet, studying the vessel through her aircraft's advanced sensors while calculating rescue approaches that defied every principle of safe aviation she'd ever learned. Through her targeting pod's infrared camera, she could see passengers crowded on the ship's upper decks, thousands of people in bright orange life jackets, huddled against whatever shelter they could find from the hurricane-force winds and driving rain. The Pacific Dawn's bridge was dark, her emergency lighting flickering intermittently as the vessel's backup power systems struggled to maintain basic operations after the tsunami's devastating impact. Pacific Dawn, this is Air Force Rescue 1, Maya transmitted on the International Maritime Distress Frequency. I have visual contact with your vessel and am coordinating immediate evacuation operations. What is your current status and passenger count? The response crackled through heavy static, the ship's radio operator's voice tight with controlled panic. Air Force Rescue, this is Pacific Dawn. We have 3,417 passengers and crew aboard. We're taking on water through hull breaches caused by earthquake damage and tsunami impact. Engineering estimates we have perhaps 4 hours before the vessel becomes unrecoverable. Maya felt her heart sink at the numbers. 4 hours to evacuate over 3,000 people from a sinking ship in Category 3 storm conditions. Even with her entire squadron operating at maximum efficiency, the mathematics were staggering. They would need to extract nearly 15 people per minute for the next 4 hours, assuming perfect conditions and flawless execution. Pacific Dawn, understood. We're deploying immediate rescue operations. I need you to organize passengers into groups of 20 and position them on your helicopter deck and upper promenade areas. We'll be conducting multiple extraction runs using specialized aircraft. Lieutenant Colonel Kim's voice cut through Maya's headset as the second flight reached their assigned targets. Rescue 1, this is Rescue 7. We have visual contact with the research vessel Oceanographic Explorer. Vessel appears to be capsized with survivors on the hull. Initiating immediate rescue operations. Maya acknowledged Kim's transmission while continuing her tactical analysis of the Pacific Dawn evacuation. The cruise ship's size and passenger load made it the most complex rescue operation her squadron had ever attempted. Traditional helicopter operations were impossible in these wind conditions, but her modified aircraft might be able to accomplish what conventional rescue assets could not. Rescue flight, this is Rescue 1, Maya transmitted to her formation. Primary target shows extensive structural damage with limited time before total loss. We're implementing Protocol 7 for mass casualty evacuation. Captains Morrison and Torres establish hover positions on the vessel's port and starboard sides. I'll coordinate passenger transfer operations. Protocol 7 was an experimental rescue technique that Maya's team had developed during training exercises, using multiple aircraft in coordinated formation to create wind shadows and stable air pockets around large vessels. The procedure had never been attempted under actual emergency conditions, particularly not in storm conditions that challenged the operational limits of their aircraft. Maya descended toward the Pacific Dawn superstructure, fighting crosswinds that varied from 120 to 180 miles per hour as she maneuvered her F-22 into position above the ship's helicopter deck. The modified stealth fighter's thrust vectoring system allowed her to maintain precise hover capabilities despite atmospheric conditions that would have made controlled flight impossible for conventional aircraft. Pacific Dawn, I'm positioning for passenger extraction on your helicopter deck, Maya announced, activating her aircraft's external rescue systems. Deploy your first group of 20 passengers with life jackets and safety harnesses. Extraction will be via external rescue basket lowered from my aircraft. What Maya was attempting had never been tried in aviation history. She was using her fighter aircraft as an improvised rescue helicopter, hovering over a storm-tossed cruise ship while extracting passengers, through a combination of thrust vectoring technology and sheer determination. The procedure violated every safety protocol in military aviation manuals, but it was also the only option available for people who were running out of time. Maya lowered her aircraft's rescue basket, watching through her targeting system as cruise ship crew members helped the first group of passengers secure themselves for extraction. The basket swayed wildly in the hurricane winds, but the ship's crew worked with professional efficiency to get people secured and ready for lift. Basket loaded with 20 passengers, the Pacific Dawn's deck officer reported. Ready for extraction. Maya engaged her winch system and began lifting the rescue basket, fighting to maintain stable hover position as the added weight and wind resistance of 20 people tested her aircraft's capabilities. The F-22's engines screamed at maximum power, consuming fuel at rates that would normally limit her operation time to minutes rather than hours. Passengers secured, Maya announced as she transferred the survivors to Captain Morrison's aircraft, which was configured with expanded passenger compartments. Morrison, proceed to recovery coordinates and transfer passengers to Coast Guard vessels. Return for next extraction cycle. The rescue operation continued with mechanical precision. Despite conditions that grew progressively worse as the Pacific storm intensified, Maya's squadron worked in rotating shifts, with aircraft extracting passengers from the Pacific Dawn, while others ferried survivors to Coast Guard recovery vessels positioned at the edge of the storm system. Lieutenant Vasquez's voice crackled through the radio with updates from the secondary rescue sites. Rescue 1, we've successfully evacuated the research vessel's crew and are proceeding to assist with cargo ship rescues. All personnel from the Oceanographic Explorer are safe and en route to recovery vessels. Maya acknowledged Vasquez's report while coordinating her third passenger extraction from the Pacific Dawn. The cruise ship was noticeably lower in the water now, her list increasing as water continued to pour through hull breaches that the vessel's damage control teams couldn't contain. Time was running out faster than anyone had calculated. Pacific Dawn, what's your current status? Maya asked during a brief pause in extraction operations. Air Force Rescue, we're losing the battle with flooding, came the grim response. Engineering now estimates 90 minutes before we lose structural integrity completely. We still have over 2,800 passengers and crew aboard. Maya felt ice in her veins as she processed the updated timeline. 90 minutes to extract nearly 3,000 people. Even operating at maximum efficiency, her squadron couldn't possibly evacuate that many passengers before the ship went down. They needed a miracle, or they needed to change the rules of what was possible. All extreme weather aircraft, this is Rescue 1, Maya transmitted to her entire squadron. We're implementing Emergency Protocol Alpha. All aircraft converge on Pacific Dawn for simultaneous mass extraction. This is what we trained for. Emergency Protocol Alpha was the most dangerous procedure in Maya's rescue manual, requiring all available aircraft to operate in close formation around a single target while conducting coordinated extraction operations. The technique multiplied their extraction capacity, but also multiplied the risk of aircraft collision or loss due to the complex flight operations required. Within minutes, all 12 aircraft of the Extreme Weather Rescue Squadron were converging on the Pacific Dawn's position, their pilots coordinating approach vectors and extraction assignments with the precision of a military aerobatics team. Maya took overall command while her pilots positioned themselves around the sinking cruise ship like an aerial rescue constellation. She could hear the conflict in Bradley's voice when he responded, "Maya, I've got my orders. General Morrison wants you back on the ground before you kill yourself and embarrass the entire Air Force." Maya was now circling Neptune's Pride at 3,000 feet, studying the platform structure through her targeting pod, while trying to develop a rescue plan that had some remote chance of success. The drilling platform was a maze of twisted metal and machinery, its helicopter landing pad destroyed by a wave surge that had also flooded most of the lower levels. 23 people were trapped on the upper decks, huddled around the platforms. Emergency beacon like survivors of a maritime disaster from another century. "Tom, I need you to do something for me," Maya said, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was about to attempt. "I need you to contact the Coast Guard and tell them to position rescue vessels at these coordinates. When I get these people off that platform, someone needs to be ready to fish them out of the water. Maya, what are you planning?" Maya armed her aircraft's emergency systems and began calculating approach vectors that would allow her to hover over the platform long enough to extract survivors. The F-22 wasn't designed for hover operations, but its thrust vectoring capabilities might allow her to maintain position over the platform despite hurricane-force winds. "Tom, I'm going to prove that sometimes the impossible is just another word for something nobody's tried yet." The F-22 shuddered violently as Maya descended through the hurricane's eye wall, her aircraft bucking against wind shear that registered off the scales of every instrument in the cockpit. Below her, Neptune's Pride looked like a child's toy, being battered by an angry giant, its steel superstructure groaning under the assault of waves that towered above the platform's highest points. Maya activated her thrust vectoring system, using the F-22's revolutionary engine nozzles to maintain position over the drilling platform. Despite crosswinds that exceeded 200 miles per hour, the aircraft's flight control computers were screaming warnings about operating outside design parameters, but the stealth fighter held position with a stability that defied everything aeronautical engineers thought they knew about flight dynamics. Through her targeting pod's infrared camera, she could see the survivors huddled on the platform's upper deck. 23 figures in bright orange survival suits clustered around the emergency beacon that had guided her through the storm. They were waving frantically at her aircraft, their desperate gestures visible even through the chaos of wind and spray that surrounded the doomed platform. "Neptune's Pride, this is Air Force Rescue," Maya transmitted on the international emergency frequency. "I have visual contact with survivors on the upper platform. Prepare for emergency evacuation." The response crackled through heavy static, the platform's radio operator's voice barely audible above the storm's fury. "Air Force Rescue, this is Neptune's Pride. We have 23 personnel ready for extraction, but our helicopter pad is destroyed and our escape boats are gone. How do you propose to get us off this platform?" Maya was already working on that problem, studying the platform structure through her aircraft's sensors, while calculating approach vectors that might allow for survivor extraction. The F-22 carried no rescue equipment, no winch systems or external cargo capacity that would normally be required for this type of operation. What it did have was something no one had ever thought to use for humanitarian rescue, a weapons bay designed to deploy precision ordnance. "Neptune's Pride, I need you to gather all personnel on the northeastern corner of the upper deck," Maya commanded, maneuvering her aircraft into position above the platform. "I'm going to deploy emergency survival equipment. When you see the packages deploy, grab them immediately and prepare for water entry." What Maya was about to attempt had never been tried in aviation history. She was going to use her aircraft's internal weapons bay to deploy life rafts and emergency supplies, essentially turning the F-22 into the world's most expensive cargo delivery system. The idea was tactically insane and potentially suicidal. But it was also the only option available for people who were running out of time. Maya opened her weapons bay doors, feeling the aircraft buck and yaw as the hurricane's winds caught the internal cavity and tried to flip the fighter inverted. Her hands flew across the controls, using every available flight surface and engine vectoring capability to maintain position over the platform while fighting atmospheric conditions that would have destroyed any other aircraft. "Maya, this is General Morrison," her radio crackled with the voice of 9th Air Force Command. "We're monitoring your position via satellite. What you're attempting is impossible. Those people need professional rescue assets, not experimental aviation stunts." Maya gritted her teeth as another massive wave crashed over Neptune's Pride, sending spray hundreds of feet into the air and causing the platform to list even further to port. The structure was failing in real time, its support columns buckling, under forces that exceeded their design specifications by orders of magnitude. "General, professional rescue assets can't reach this position in these conditions," Maya replied, fighting to keep her voice steady as the F-22 dropped suddenly in a wind shear that felt like falling off a cliff. "I'm the only aircraft within 300 miles that can operate in Category 5 conditions." She activated the emergency supply caches that had been loaded into her weapons bay for extended patrol missions. Packages containing life rafts, emergency beacons, and survival supplies that could keep 23 people alive until the storm passed and conventional rescue assets could reach them. The packages deployed with mechanical precision, their bright yellow containers tumbling through the hurricane winds toward the platform below. Maya watched through her targeting system as the Neptune's Pride crew scrambled to secure the survival equipment, their movements coordinated despite the chaos surrounding them. These were experienced offshore workers, people who understood maritime emergencies and knew how to function under pressure. They would need every bit of that experience to survive what came next. "Neptune's Pride, packages delivered," Maya transmitted. "You have 4 military-grade life rafts capable of handling these sea conditions. Deploy them on the lee side of the platform and prepare for water entry when I give the signal." The platform's radio operator responded immediately. "Air Force. Rescue, negative on water entry. Current sea state is 40-foot swells with hurricane-force winds. Those life rafts won't survive 5 minutes in these conditions." Maya was already calculating ocean current patterns and wind drift, using meteorological data that she'd memorized during her hurricane hunter days to predict where the life rafts would end up if they launched from Neptune's Pride's current position. The mathematics were complex, but the conclusion was clear. The survivors would have approximately 15 minutes of relative safety before the storm's eye wall passed and conditions became absolutely unsurvivable. "Neptune's Pride, I'm going to create a wind shadow on your northeastern side," Maya announced, positioning her aircraft between the platform and Hurricane Delilah's most violent winds. "When I give the signal, deploy the rafts and abandon platform immediately. Coast Guard vessels are standing by at recovery coordinates." What Maya was attempting violated every principle of aeronautical safety she'd ever learned. She was using her aircraft as a windbreak, flying in formation with a fixed structure, while operating in conditions that should have made controlled flight impossible. The F-22's stealth characteristics were actually helping, its angular surfaces deflecting and channeling wind flow in ways that created a pocket of slightly less violent air on the platform's downwind side. Maya held position for 3 minutes that felt like hours, fighting crosswinds that varied from 150 to 220 miles per hour while maintaining precise formation with a drilling platform that was being tossed around by waves larger than most buildings. Her engines were operating at maximum power, consuming fuel at rates that would normally limit her flight time to minutes rather than hours. "Deploy rafts now." "Pacific Dawn, we're implementing emergency mass evacuation," Maya announced. Organize all remaining passengers into groups and position them at every available deck space. We're coming to get everyone. The next hour became a blur of impossible. Flying as Maya's squadron pushed their aircraft and themselves beyond every limit of endurance and capability. 12 pilots working in perfect coordination, extracting passengers from a sinking ship in storm conditions that should have made formation flying suicidal. Maya lost track of individual rescue cycles as she focused on maintaining formation, integrity, and coordinating passenger transfers. Her fuel gauges showed levels that would normally trigger emergency landing procedures, but there was no alternative except to continue until every soul was off the Pacific Dawn or until their aircraft could no longer remain airborne. Rescue 1, this is Coast Guard Group San Francisco. Admiral Walsh's voice cut through the radio chatter. We're tracking your operations via satellite. Current survivor count is approaching 2,400 extracted, with Coast Guard vessels reporting. All personnel in good condition, despite the circumstances. Maya checked her navigation display, calculating fuel consumption and operational time remaining. Her squadron was operating on fumes and determination, their aircraft pushed to mechanical limits that would require extensive maintenance after the mission. But they were succeeding where conventional wisdom said success was impossible. Pacific Dawn, how many passengers remaining? Maya asked during what she hoped would be one of the final extraction cycles. Air Force Rescue, we have approximately 200 passengers and essential crew remaining, the ship's officer replied. But Major, the vessel is going down fast. We may not have time for controlled evacuation much longer. Maya made a decision that would either save lives or cost her everything she'd worked to build. All extreme weather aircraft, final extraction. Everyone comes home now. Deploy all emergency rescue systems and prepare for emergency ship abandonment. Procedures. The final extraction was a masterpiece of precision flying under impossible conditions. 12 aircraft operating in formation around a sinking cruise ship, their pilots executing rescue procedures with the skill and coordination that came from endless training and absolute trust in their equipment and each other. Maya watched through her targeting system as the last passengers were lifted from the Pacific Dawn's tilting decks. 200 people who owed their lives to pilots, who had proven that the impossible was just another word for something that required extraordinary skill and determination. Pacific Dawn, all passengers evacuated, Maya announced as her aircraft cleared the cruise ship's superstructure for the final time. Ship's crew, prepare for abandonment. We'll extract essential personnel in 30 seconds. The Pacific Dawn's final crew members were lifted from their sinking vessel, just as the cruise ship's superstructure began its final descent into the Pacific's storm-tossed waters. Maya watched the massive vessel disappear beneath the waves, carrying with it everything, except the 3,417 lives that her squadron had saved through 4 hours of flying that redefined what military aviation could accomplish. The flight back to Edwards Air Force Base was conducted in formation. 12 aircraft that had collectively saved over 5,000 lives in conditions that meteorologists would later describe as unsurvivable. Maya led her squadron home with fuel gauges showing empty, and hearts full of the satisfaction that came from perfect mission execution. 3 weeks later, Maya stood in the White House Rose Garden as the President of the United States presented the Presidential Unit Citation to the Air Force Extreme Weather Rescue Squadron, the nation's highest military unit honor. The citation read, "For extraordinary heroism and exceptional professional skill in conducting rescue operations under impossible conditions, resulting in the preservation of over 5,000 lives and advancing the science of military aviation." As the ceremony concluded, Admiral Walsh made her way through the crowd, her expression composed but warm, carrying the rare kind of respect that rises above service branches and formal hierarchy. "Major Rodriguez," she said, stopping before Maya, The Pacific Rescue has now been classified as the most successful multi-vessel evacuation in maritime history. Your team's methods are being analyzed by rescue and emergency organizations across the globe. Maya looked out across the White House lawn at her squadron. 12 pilots whose diverse backgrounds and unwavering competence had proven that excellence in military aviation came from skill and determination rather than conformity to traditional expectations. Lieutenant Colonel Kim was discussing rescue techniques with senior Pentagon officials. Captain Morrison was coordinating with international rescue organizations. Lieutenant Torres was already planning the next training evolution that would push their capabilities even further. "Admiral, we just did what needed to be done," Maya replied. Someone had to prove that when disaster strikes, the response shouldn't be limited by what people think is possible. 6 months later, Major Maya Rodriguez, now promoted to lieutenant colonel, stood before the largest graduating class in the history of the Air Force Extreme Weather Rescue School. The classroom was filled with pilots from every branch of military service and several allied nations, men and women who had come to learn techniques that had revolutionized emergency aviation. "The first principle of extreme weather rescue," Maya began, looking out at faces that represented the future of military aviation, "is understanding that the storm doesn't care about your gender, your background, or what anyone else thinks about your capabilities. It only cares about your skill, your preparation, and your absolute refusal to abandon people who need help." Outside the classroom windows, clear skies stretched toward the Pacific, but Maya knew that somewhere in the world, storms were building and disasters were developing that would require extraordinary responses from ordinary people. Her program had proven that when the impossible became necessary, properly trained and equipped pilots could accomplish miracles. "Your mission," Maya concluded, "is to be ready when that call comes. Ready to fly when others say flying is impossible. Ready to rescue when others say rescue is hopeless. Ready to prove that the only real limitation in aviation is the size of your determination to succeed." The thunderous applause that followed carried the sound of barriers falling and new possibilities being born. Maya Rodriguez had begun her career fighting to prove that she belonged in military aviation. She was ending it by training the next generation of pilots who would never have to fight those same battles because she had already won them. As the ceremony concluded and her newest graduates prepared to join rescue squadrons around the world, Maya reflected on the journey that had brought her from a doubted pilot to a legend whose techniques were taught at aviation schools globally. She had not just broken through barriers, she had demolished them completely, creating opportunities for everyone who came after her. The story of the simple pilot who couldn't fly jets had become the legend of the leader who proved that with enough skill, courage, and determination, there was no such thing as impossible conditions, only extraordinary solutions waiting to be discovered by extraordinary people. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.